Let me ask you something. How many times have you dimmed your light just to make someone else comfortable? How often have you explained, justified, and defended your choices, your dreams, or even your silence, just to be accepted? We live in a world that constantly demands explanations. Why did you say that? Why are you dressed like that? Why don't you do what everyone else is doing? But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone an explanation for being who you are. And the moment you realize that, the moment you stop justifying your worth, your path, your peace, that's the moment you begin to truly respect yourself. Today, I'm not just here to talk. I'm here to remind you of something powerful. You are allowed to live your life boldly, unapologetically, and without permission. Because self-respect isn't given, it's claimed. And it starts the moment you stop explaining yourself. There comes a point in life where you realize that not everyone will understand you, and not everyone is supposed to. But for years, many of us fall into the trap of believing that in order to be accepted, validated, or respected, we must explain every choice we make. We give reasons for how we speak, why we dress the way we do, why we chose this path over another, why we said no instead of yes, or yes instead of no. We break ourselves down into digestible pieces for people who were never really hungry to understand us in the first place. This habit starts early. As children, we're taught to say sorry too often, not just when we've done something wrong, but when we've simply chosen to be ourselves. We learn to seek approval before we act, to seek permission before we speak, and to over-explain when someone looks at us with confusion or disapproval. That conditioning becomes a script we carry into adulthood. It's the internal narrative that tells us we need to justify our dreams, defend our boundaries, and rationalize our emotions. We become experts at negotiation, not in business deals, but in negotiating our worth every time we feel the need to explain ourselves to someone else. But here's the problem: when you constantly explain yourself, what you're really doing is giving other people the authority to decide whether or not your choices are valid. You're handing over your power little by little. In every conversation where you try to be understood rather than just being whole, you're subconsciously saying, "My worth depends on whether or not you agree with me." And that mindset is a cage, a beautifully decorated, socially acceptable cage that we lock ourselves into day after day. Think about how many times you've stopped yourself from speaking your truth because you were afraid of how it would be received. Think about the times you've watered down your opinions, or hidden your excitement, or delayed your decisions, not because they weren't right for you, but because you thought someone else wouldn't get it. This is how self-doubt takes root, not always through criticism or rejection, but through the constant pressure to explain who you are to people who were never meant to define you. It's exhausting, isn't it? To keep trying to be understood in a world that often doesn't even understand itself, to keep molding yourself into shapes that don't fit, just to be accepted by people whose standards keep shifting. It drains you, and over time, it erodes the very foundation of your self-worth. You don't owe anyone a justification for choosing peace over chaos, solitude over noise, growth over comfort, or authenticity over approval. When you choose to walk away from something that no longer serves you, you don't need to write a thesis explaining your decision. When you decline an invitation because you're prioritizing your mental health, that's not selfish, it's self-respect. When you pursue a dream that others find unrealistic, you don't need to convince them it's possible. The fact that it's real to you is enough. There is a quiet power in standing firm in who you are without feeling the need to defend it. That power comes from knowing that your worth is not a group project. It's not something that increases when people agree with you, and it doesn't diminish when they don't. It's intrinsic. It's rooted in your very being. And the moment you stop negotiating it through explanations, you begin to feel a level of freedom that no external validation could ever match. We often think that explaining ourselves will bring us closer to others, that it will bridge the gap between misunderstanding and connection. But in reality, over-explaining often creates distance. Why? Because it shifts the focus from being to proving, from living to performing. It creates a dynamic where you're constantly on the defense, constantly trying to persuade someone that your choices are okay, acceptable, justifiable. And that dynamic is rarely rooted in mutual respect. People who truly respect you, who truly value you, won't need you to explain yourself all the time. They may not always understand your decisions, but they'll honor your right to make them. They'll recognize that your life is your own, and that your path doesn't need their approval to be valid. And the people who demand constant explanations, more often than not, they're seeking control, not clarity. They're uncomfortable with your independence, with your confidence, with your refusal to shrink for their comfort. And that discomfort isn't yours to manage. The truth is, the more you explain yourself, the more permission you subconsciously give people to question you. It becomes a loop. You explain, they question. You explain more, they doubt more. And soon your confidence starts to erode, not because you're wrong, but because you've tied your self-worth to their understanding of you. That's a losing game. Think of the people you admire most. The leaders, the artists, the visionaries, the everyday people who move through the world with quiet confidence. They aren't constantly explaining themselves. They act with clarity, and they let their results, their energy, and their authenticity speak for them. They understand that you can be kind without being compliant, that you can be compassionate without being constantly available, that you can be confident without being arrogant. And they know that their worth is not a pitch to be sold or an essay to be written. Learning to stop explaining yourself isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's about creating boundaries that protect your energy and preserve your peace. It's about recognizing that your value isn't determined by how many people get you. In fact, the more you grow, the more misunderstood you might become. And that's okay. Growth often looks like silence to the outside world. It looks like disappearing for a while, like saying no more than yes, like walking away from the familiar and stepping into the unknown. And yes, people will ask questions. They'll want explanations, but you don't have to give them. When you stop explaining yourself, you start hearing yourself. You start tuning into your own voice, your own wisdom, your own inner compass. And what you find there is often far more powerful than any external validation could ever be. You start making choices not based on how they'll be perceived, but based on how they feel to your soul. You stop chasing approval and you start honoring alignment. And that shift changes everything. It changes the way you speak. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop using filler words to soften your truth. You speak clearly, directly, and with intention, not to please, but to express. It changes the way you walk into rooms. You no longer shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You no longer dress, act, or move based on how you'll be judged. You show up fully, knowing that the right people will recognize your light without you having to dim it first. It changes the way you build relationships. You start attracting people who see you, not just for what you do or how well you explain yourself, but for who you are when you're not trying. The friendships and connections that come from that place are deeper, more honest, and far more fulfilling. And most importantly, it changes the way you see yourself. You begin to realize that your worth was never in question, that it didn't need to be explained, defended, or proven. It just needed to be claimed. Claimed by you. Every time you choose not to over-explain, not to justify, not to dilute yourself for the sake of comfort, you're sending a message. Not just to the world, but to your own soul. The message is simple, but powerful. I trust myself. And trust is the foundation of self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation of every truly empowered decision you will ever make. When you operate from a place of self-respect, you stop needing to be chosen, you choose yourself. You stop needing to be understood. You understand yourself. You stop waiting for permission, you give it to yourself. This doesn't mean you stop communicating or that you shut people out. It means you choose your moments. You speak when it serves a purpose, not when it serves someone else's insecurity. You share from a place of strength, not from a place of seeking validation. You become intentional with your words, your time, and your energy. And in doing so, you teach others how to treat you without ever needing to explain it. Silence is often misunderstood. In a world that constantly encourages louder voices, faster reactions, and immediate responses, silence can easily be mistaken for passivity, uncertainty, or even weakness. We're taught from a young age to speak up, to defend ourselves, to explain our every move. We're told that if we don't speak, we'll be overlooked, misunderstood, or taken advantage of. And while there's truth in the power of voice, there's an equal, if not greater, power in knowing when not to use it. Silence is not always absence. It's not an empty space waiting to be filled. In many cases, it's presence in its most disciplined and refined form. It's the decision to stay grounded rather than reactive, centered rather than scattered. It's the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't feel the need to prove anything, who knows their value isn't tied to how loudly or quickly they respond. Silence, when chosen from a place of strength, is a declaration of self-respect. When someone insults you, undermines you, or doubts you, the natural instinct is to push back, to explain, to fight for recognition. That's human. But every time you rise to defend yourself against ignorance or insecurity, you risk giving your power away. You hand over your energy to people who thrive on reaction. Silence, in these moments, is not surrender, it's strategy. It's the recognition that not every battle is worth fighting, not every opinion deserves a rebuttal, and not every comment requires a response. There's dignity in restraint. There's maturity in choosing not to argue with those who are committed to misunderstanding you. And that choice isn't made because you're afraid or uncertain. It's made because you respect yourself too much to waste your breath on noise that doesn't move you forward. Silence becomes your boundary. It becomes the space in which you protect your peace, your energy, your time, and your identity. We live in a world that rewards performance. The louder you are, the more visible you become. The faster you respond, the more engaged you seem. But real growth, real transformation, and real understanding often happen in the quiet. It's in the silence that we process. It's in the silence that we listen to others, to the world, and most importantly, to ourselves. Silence gives you the space to understand what you're really feeling, what you really believe, and what you really want to say, if anything at all. There's also a kind of silence that speaks volumes. It's the silence that follows disrespect. Not out of fear, but out of knowing that your response isn't needed to expose someone's character. It's the silence that follows rejection. Not because you don't care, but because you know your worth isn't defined by someone else's inability to see it. It's the silence that follows betrayal. Not because you're weak, but because your energy is too sacred to be wasted on people who didn't value it in the first place. Silence is a pause, not a void. It's a conscious act of preservation. It's you saying, I don't need to explain myself to be understood. I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. I don't need to react to feel powerful. And that kind of self-restraint is something only the deeply self-aware can master. It doesn't come from insecurity. It comes from clarity, from strength, from experience, from knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. It takes a certain level of evolution to understand this. At first, silence feels uncomfortable. It feels like losing. It feels like backing down. But over time, you begin to realize that silence is not the absence of a fight. It's the refusal to participate in battles that don't honor your spirit. You start to understand that silence isn't void of power. It's saturated with it. The kind of power that doesn't need validation. The kind of power that speaks through actions, presence, and unshakable self-trust. People will sometimes mistake your silence for indifference. Let them. Let them assume you're quiet because you have nothing to say, when in reality, you simply have nothing to prove. Let them believe you're unaffected, when in truth, you've just mastered the art of emotional discipline. Silence is not about suppression. It's about selection. It's not that you're incapable of speaking. It's that you've decided your peace is more valuable than temporary satisfaction. When you choose silence, you're choosing intention over impulse. You're choosing to observe instead of react. You're choosing to respond when it serves you, not when someone else demands it. This choice is an act of self-respect because it prioritizes your mental and emotional clarity over the chaos of external noise. You begin to learn that not every situation deserves your commentary, not every conflict deserves your energy, and not every audience deserves your performance. You've probably heard the phrase, real G's move in silence. It's become cliché, but there's wisdom in it. The strongest people don't walk into every room demanding attention. They don't announce every move before they make it. They don't engage in every debate. They understand the value of mystery, of holding back, of not letting everyone access their inner world. That restraint isn't fear, it's sovereignty. It's control over one's own narrative, and that control is rooted in respect for self, for energy, and for purpose. In relationships, silence can be just as powerful. Sometimes it's better to pause than to speak from a place of hurt or confusion. Sometimes the silent exit is louder than any confrontation. Silence, in this context, becomes a mirror. It forces others to confront themselves without your words to soften the blow. It creates space for reflection. It invites the other person to meet you in maturity or not meet you at all. And either outcome reveals a truth you needed to see. In leadership, silence is often mistaken for indecision, but in reality, it's often the mark of discernment. Great leaders know when to speak and when to listen. They understand that rushing to fill silence with words can dilute their message. They know that silence allows space for others to contribute, to be heard, to feel seen. And when they do speak, their words carry more weight. Not because they're loud, but because they're intentional. In personal growth, silence is where you meet yourself. It's in the quiet moments, away from distractions, obligations, and expectations, that you hear the whispers of your own soul. Silence teaches you what really matters. It reveals the parts of you that are still healing, the dreams you've been ignoring, the fears you've been suppressing. It teaches you patience. It teaches you presence. It teaches you power. The ability to sit in silence without discomfort is a form of emotional intelligence. It means you're no longer looking for external stimulation to define your internal state. It means you're comfortable in your own presence. That's rare. Most people are addicted to noise, not just auditory noise, but emotional and mental noise. They constantly need to explain, justify, react, or perform. Silence threatens that addiction. It disrupts the cycle, and that disruption is where growth begins. You'll notice that the more you grow, the less you feel the need to explain yourself. The less you feel the urge to correct every misperception. The less you tolerate noise disguised as connection. You become more selective with your words, more mindful of your reactions, more protective of your peace. And in doing so, you begin to embody a deeper kind of strength, the kind that doesn't flex, doesn't shout, doesn't prove. It just is. Choosing silence doesn't mean you allow disrespect. It means you address it with intention, not impulse. It means you don't let someone else's chaos dictate your calm. It means you know when to walk away, when to pause, when to wait, and when to speak from clarity instead of emotion. That kind of self-control is not weakness. It's the highest form of respect for yourself and your energy. People who misunderstand your silence may try to provoke you, to pull you into reaction, to get you to abandon your calm so they can feel comfortable again. Let them try. Your stillness isn't for them. It's for you. And over time, that stillness becomes a sanctuary. It becomes your default. It becomes the space where you reclaim your power again and again, not through force, but through unwavering presence. Silence is where wisdom grows. It's where clarity emerges. It's where healing begins. And when you learn to value it, you no longer fear being misunderstood because you're no longer seeking external validation to feel complete. You're no longer trading your peace for temporary applause. You're no longer diluting your energy just to be heard in rooms that don't even matter. Silence is not emptiness. It's full of everything you've learned, everything you've overcome, and everything you've chosen to protect. It's the container that holds your growth, your discipline, your self-respect. And once you learn how to stand in that silence without flinching, you become untouchable, not because you've built walls, but because you've built awareness. Not because you're hiding, but because you're choosing to honor yourself before anyone else.